I stood there in my $5,000 wedding dress, surrounded by 300 guests, waiting for the man who promised me the world. 3 hours passed. No groom, no calls, just whispers. That's when I discovered the truth about the millionaire who left this black woman at the altar. I stood there in my $5,000 wedding dress, surrounded by 300 guests, the chapel decorated with white roses and gold accents that cost more than my first car. The organist had played the wedding march 3 times already. My father squeezed my hand, his eyes asking questions I couldn't answer. "He's coming," I whispered, more to convince myself than him. But 3 hours later, as the whispers grew louder and the pitying glances became unbearable, I knew the truth that my heart refused to accept. I had been left at the altar. My name is Jasmine, and 6 months ago, I was supposed to marry Malcolm Reynolds, tech entrepreneur and self-made millionaire with a portfolio of properties across 3 states and a smile that could melt the ice caps. The man who promised me forever over champagne in Paris. The man who said my ambitious spirit and intelligence were what drew him to me. The man who told me that in me, he had finally found his equal. I was that bride in the viral photos, the one standing outside that grand cathedral, mascara streaking down my face, still in my wedding dress at sunset, while bridesmaids huddled around me. The black woman, abandoned by her wealthy white fiancé, turned into memes and morning show discussions about interracial relationships and gold-digging accusations. For weeks, I couldn't open social media without seeing my pain splashed across the internet, twisted into entertainment for strangers. But what those photos didn't capture was the text message I received as I finally left the church. "I'm sorry, I couldn't go through with it. You deserve someone from your world." My world. As if my blackness was another planet he had briefly visited but couldn't inhabit permanently. As if the woman he claimed to love for 2 years suddenly became too foreign when it was time to make it official. What the headlines never mentioned was how he emptied our joint account 3 days before. How his mother had called me the night before with thinly veiled concerns about cultural differences and future children. How his business partner later revealed Malcolm had been planning his escape for months, calculating the exact moment to leave that would cause the least damage to his reputation and the most to mine. I'm not sharing this for your pity. I don't need that. I'm sharing this because somewhere out there, someone else is ignoring the same red flags I did. Someone is believing promises that sound too perfect, overlooking comments that make their skin crawl, making excuses for inexcusable behavior because love is supposed to conquer all. But love without respect is just a beautiful lie. If you've ever trusted someone who betrayed you, stay with me. If you've ever ignored your intuition because their words drowned out your inner voice, this story is for you. What happened to me was more than just a cancelled wedding. It was a carefully orchestrated deception that I should have seen coming. The signs were there, hidden in plain sight behind grand gestures and future promises. And my story might just save you from the same heartbreak I experienced. Because trust me when I say this, sometimes the most expensive lesson is the one that saves you from something worse. This is how I learned mine. I met Malcolm on a rainy Tuesday at a tech conference in San Francisco. I was there representing my digital marketing firm, a small but growing company I'd built from scratch after leaving my corporate job. He was the keynote speaker, talking about disrupting the financial technology industry with his new payment platform. I remember rolling my eyes slightly at some of his more grandiose claims, which is probably why he approached me at the networking event afterward. "You didn't seem impressed," he said, handing me a glass of wine. Most people in that room were eating out of my hand. His confidence should have been off-putting, but there was something refreshingly self-aware about it. I told him I'd need to see more concrete results before buying the hype. He laughed, a genuine laugh that reached his eyes. Finally, someone who sees through the tech bro bullshit. Before Malcolm, my dating life had been a series of disappointments. Men who were intimidated by my ambition. Men who expected me to shrink myself to make them feel bigger. Men who fetishized my blackness or wanted to experiment with an exotic woman. I was 32, successful, and tired of compromising. So, I had stopped dating altogether for nearly a year, focusing instead on growing my business and finding fulfillment in my friendships and community work. Malcolm was different, or so I thought. He asked about my company with genuine interest, offered connections without conditions, followed up when he said he would. When he mentioned his net worth during our third date, I actually appreciated his transparency. "I need you to know what you're getting into," he said. "Money changes how people see you, how they approach you. I need to know you see me, not what I can give you." Looking back, I realize he was setting the stage, creating a narrative where any future complaints I might have would sound like gold digging. Classic manipulation dressed as vulnerability. But at the time, I was touched by his honesty. Our fifth date was a weekend in Napa Valley. He sent a car to pick me up, had reserved the entire rooftop of the most exclusive winery for just us. Under the stars, surrounded by vineyards, he told me he'd never met a woman with my combination of intelligence, grace, and beauty. "Most women in my circle were born into privilege," he said. "But you built yourself from nothing. That kind of strength is rare." I should have noticed how he constantly emphasized our differences rather than our similarities. How he spoke about my background, daughter of educators from Oakland, as if I'd emerged from some unfathomable hardship. How he positioned himself as the enlightened white man who could appreciate what others couldn't see. My best friend Kendra saw it immediately. "He talks about you like you're his diversity initiative, not his girlfriend," she said after meeting him at dinner. I dismissed her concerns, accusing her of being jealous or cynical. "Not every successful white man has an agenda, Kendra," I argued. The irony of those words haunts me now. 6 months in, Malcolm began introducing me to his world. Charity galas, where I was often the only black person not serving drinks. Business dinners where colleagues would compliment me for being so articulate. Weekends at vacation homes where friends would touch my hair without permission after a few drinks. Each time, Malcolm would squeeze my hand under the table, his signal that he understood my discomfort. Later, he'd acknowledge the microaggressions, positioning himself as my ally. "They just don't know any better," he'd say. "You're changing their perspective just by being you." I didn't realize I was being cast as both educational tool and exotic accessory in his life, my discomfort repackaged as a noble sacrifice for social progress. I ignored every red flag because I was in love with his potential, with what we could be together, with the doors he seemed eager to open for me. I was the strong, independent woman who never needed a man, until I convinced myself I needed this one. After 3 months of dating, Malcolm's world became mine, or rather, he pulled me into his orbit so completely that I began to lose sight of my own. Our relationship accelerated at a dizzying pace. Weekend trips to Mexico turned into impromptu flights to Milan for Fashion Week. Dinners at nice restaurants became private chef experiences in his penthouse. My modest one-bedroom apartment was suddenly too far from everything, so I found myself staying at his place 4, 5, 6 nights a week. "Let me show you how life can be," he'd say, presenting each experience like a gift I'd been denied my whole life. And I drank it all in: the champagne, the luxury, the intoxicating feeling of being chosen by someone who could have anyone. When you've worked your entire life for everything you have, there's something seductive about effortlessness, about doors swinging open without you having to push. His friends welcomed me with practiced smiles and air kisses. The wives and girlfriends invited me to their charity committees and tennis clubs. "Malcolm has never brought anyone around like this," they'd whisper, making me feel special, chosen. But beneath their warmth was always an undercurrent, subtle questions about my people and where I came from originally. as if Oakland was as foreign as another planet. They touched my hair, asked if I could teach them to twerk, told me I was not like other black women they'd met. Malcolm noticed my discomfort but reframed it. "They're just trying to connect," he'd say. "You intimidate them with your success." He positioned himself as the bridge between our worlds, the translator of cultural differences. And slowly, I began censoring myself, laughing off comments that cut deep, straightening my naturally curly hair for important events, code switching so seamlessly, I sometimes lost track of my authentic voice. 8 months in, Malcolm had a crisis with one of his companies, a security breach that threatened to tank the stock price. I stayed up 3 nights straight with him, leveraging my marketing expertise to craft a crisis communication strategy. When the company not only recovered but saw its stock rise, he looked at me with new eyes. "We're unstoppable together," he said. "You're not just arm candy, you're my secret weapon." That weekend, he flew me to Santorini. Sunset dinner, private violinist, ring hidden in the dessert. The proposal was like a scene from a movie. The diamond was flawless, 6 carats, custom designed. "It had to be unique," he said, "because there's never been anyone like you in my life." Through tears, I said yes. Of course I said yes. The man I loved was promising me forever, while the Aegean Sea sparkled below us like it was putting on a show just for us. The engagement announcement went viral in his tech circles. Suddenly, I wasn't just Malcolm's girlfriend. I was his fiancée, the woman who had transformed him from tech playboy to devoted partner. Articles featured us. Tech titan finds love with marketing maven. What they didn't mention was how those same publications had never cared about my business achievements until I had an expensive ring on my finger. My mother approached our engagement with cautious optimism. "He seems sincere," she said, "but remember who you are, Jasmine. Don't lose yourself becoming what he wants." My father was more direct. "A man who truly loves you won't rush. He'll give you time to be sure." But their voices faded beneath the chorus of congratulations and Malcolm's intoxicating promises of our future. The reality shifts came subtly. Malcolm began suggesting I scale back my company to focus on our future family. He introduced me to his investment advisor, who recommended consolidating our finances. "For tax purposes," Malcolm explained. When I hesitated, he seemed hurt. "Don't you trust me? We're going to be husband and wife." His family was perfectly polite but never warm. His mother would reminisce about women he'd dated before, all of them white, all of them from good families. His father asked about my family's medical history with uncomfortable frequency. "Just being thorough," he'd say with a tight smile. At Christmas, his grandmother gave everyone personalized ornaments, except me. "I wasn't sure what you people celebrate," she said. Malcolm defended me, but always in private, never challenging them directly. "They're from a different generation," he'd explain. "They'll come around when they see how happy you make me." He positioned their racism as a temporary misunderstanding that our love would eventually overcome. And I believed him because I needed to, because admitting the truth would mean acknowledging that the future I was racing toward might be built on sand. The night he proposed, Malcolm promised we would build a life that combined the best of both our worlds. But as wedding plans accelerated, it became increasingly clear that our future would exist exclusively in his world, on his terms, with my identity as a beautiful, acceptable accessory, the different choice that made him seem enlightened without requiring him to actually change anything about his privileged existence. I ignored it all because I loved him, because I thought love could conquer deeply embedded prejudice, because I believed his promise that our love story would rewrite the rules. I was wrong. Wedding planning with Malcolm was like being handed the controls to a dream machine. "Budget isn't a concern," he said casually during our first meeting with the wedding planner, a rail-thin woman with a French accent who charged more for her services than my parents' mortgage. "I want Jasmine to have everything she's ever imagined." The truth was, I'd never been the little girl who dreamed of her wedding day. I'd been too busy dreaming of boardrooms and business plans. But suddenly, I was thrust into a world of choices I never knew existed. Did I prefer Tahitian or South Sea pearls for the place card holders? Should the champagne tower have 175 glasses, or an even 200? Would I like the guests to receive their welcome boxes the night before or the morning of? At first, I approached it like a project, creating spreadsheets and mood boards. Malcolm seemed delighted by my efficiency, but gently redirected me. "You don't need to manage this like a business acquisition," he laughed. "Just feel it. Choose what makes your heart sing." That phrase became his mantra during planning, whatever makes your heart sing, while he remained strangely detached from most decisions, except the guest list. There, he was meticulously involved. My side was capped at 75 people, while his expanded to over 225. "These are important business connections," he explained when I questioned the imbalance. "People who need to be there for optics." When I pushed to invite my college roommate and her husband, a couple Malcolm deemed chaotic, after one dinner, he sighed as if I was being difficult. "This wedding isn't just about us, Jasmine. It's about positioning us for our future." Our future. The phrase that silenced all my objections. His mother inserted herself into every decision. From the venue, "The country club has such history, dear," to my dress, "Perhaps something slimming, with your figure ... She scheduled tastings during my important meetings, selected florists without consulting me, and once, accidentally, removed my 3 bridesmaids from the hair and makeup schedule. "Oh, I assumed they'd handle that themselves," she said with wide-eyed innocence. 4 months before the wedding, I discovered she'd changed our first dance song from the Al Green classic we'd chosen to an orchestral waltz. When I confronted Malcolm, he seemed genuinely torn. "Mum's been dreaming of this day too," he said. "Can't we compromise?" By compromise, he meant me yielding, always me. My dress became another battleground. I'd fallen in love with a modern, architectural design by a black designer making waves in the bridal industry. Malcolm's mother pushed instead for a traditional ball gown from an established designer. "Everyone will be watching you," she reminded me, her voice honey-sweet with venom. "You want to look appropriate." When I stood firm on my choice, Malcolm praised my strong will, but asked if I might consider a veil to balance the contemporary with tradition. As the wedding approached, Malcolm grew distant. Late nights at the office stretched longer. Weekend getaways were cancelled for emergency meetings. When we were together, he was physically present but mentally elsewhere, checking his phone, making cryptic calls in other rooms. "Just tying up loose ends before the honeymoon," he'd explain, kissing my forehead like I was a child needing reassurance. 3 weeks before the wedding, I found him in his home office at 3 a.m., on a call speaking in hushed tones. He claimed it was a business crisis in Tokyo, but when I checked his laptop later, the browser history showed searches for properties in Switzerland and offshore banking options. My stomach knotted, but I pushed the feeling down. Pre-wedding jitters, I told myself. Rich people things I didn't understand yet. The rehearsal dinner was at an exclusive restaurant overlooking the city. Malcolm gave a beautiful toast about finding his perfect match, his voice breaking at just the right moments. His friends roasted him lovingly, telling stories of his bachelor days, while winking at me as if to say, "You've tamed him." My father's speech was shorter, filled with wisdom about partnership and equality. I noticed Malcolm checking his watch 3 times during those 2 minutes. Later that night in our hotel suite, as I hung up my wedding dress, Malcolm received a text that made his face change, a flash of something cold and calculated before he composed himself. "Work never stops," he said with a forced smile. He kissed me mechanically and announced he needed air, a walk to clear his head before the big day. He returned 3 hours later smelling of expensive scotch. When I asked where he'd been, he crawled into bed, wrapped his arms around me and whispered, just saying goodbye to my old life. Tomorrow it's just you and me forever. I fell asleep in his arms, ignoring the hollow feeling in my chest, the voice in my head screaming that something was deeply wrong. Morning came with champagne breakfast and my bridesmaids filling the suite with laughter. Malcolm had moved to the groomsmen's suite, sending a bouquet of white roses with a card that read, "To New Beginnings." I touched the pearls my grandmother had given me, something old, and prepared to become Mrs. Reynolds, pushing down every doubt, every warning sign, every instinct screaming that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I didn't know then that Malcolm had already checked out of our suite, that while I was getting my makeup done, his private jet was being fueled, that the forever he promised had less than 5 hours remaining. The morning of my wedding day dawned perfect. 75 degrees, cloudless blue sky, a gentle breeze that seemed cinematically designed for the outdoor photos we'd planned. I woke up to champagne and strawberries delivered by the hotel staff, a handwritten note from Malcolm. "Today, two become one. I can't wait to see you walk toward our future." My bridesmaids arrived in a flurry of garment bags and makeup cases. Kendra, my maid of honor, kept squeezing my hand, her eyes searching mine. "You good, girl?" "Really good," I nodded, pushing down the knot in my stomach. Nerves, I told myself. Just nerves. The hairstylist wove pearl pins through my natural curls. I'd insisted on wearing my hair in its natural state, despite subtle suggestions from Malcolm's mother that I might want something more classic. My phone buzzed with messages from well-wishers, but nothing from Malcolm. "Grooms aren't supposed to contact the bride on the wedding day," my mother said, noticing my glances at the screen. "It's tradition." But Malcolm had never cared about tradition, had prided himself on making his own rules. His silence felt wrong, but I pushed the thought away as my makeup artist applied my final touches. The cathedral was Malcolm's choice. Gothic architecture, stained glass, history seeping from every stone. "Reynolds men have married here for 3 generations, he'd explained when we first visited. I'd wanted something more modern, perhaps outdoors, but he'd been uncharacteristically insistent. Now, as I arrived at the back entrance, I understood why. The cathedral's grandeur made a statement about wealth, position, legacy, all the things Malcolm valued most. My father met me at the bridal suite door, tears welling in his eyes. "My beautiful girl," he whispered. "It's not too late, you know. If anything feels wrong, we can walk right out that door. No questions asked." For a heartbeat, I considered it. Then I heard the string quartet begin the processional for the bridesmaids, and the moment passed. 1 o'clock came. The wedding coordinator gave us our cue. My father and I took our positions at the cathedral doors. The organist began the first notes of the wedding march. The guests rose, turning expectantly toward me. I took a deep breath and stepped into my future. Except Malcolm wasn't there. At first, I didn't understand. Perhaps he was in the bathroom. Perhaps there was a last-minute boutonniere adjustment. But as my father and I reached the halfway point of the aisle, the whispers began. Malcolm's best man was checking his phone frantically. The officiant's smile grew strained. And still, we walked, each step heavier than the last, until we reached the altar where no groom stood waiting. "He's just running late," the best man announced to the crowd, his voice echoing unnaturally in the sudden silence. "Technical difficulties with the car. Please, everyone enjoy some refreshments while we sort this out." I stood there, frozen, as guests awkwardly made their way to the side parlor where champagne was being served. My father's arm around my waist was the only thing keeping me upright. Kendra appeared at my side, phone in hand. "His groomsmen can't reach him," she said quietly. "His phone is going straight to voicemail." 1 hour passed, then 2. Guests began leaving, murmuring excuses. Malcolm's mother sat rigid in the front pew, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. My mother moved among our family and friends, thanking them for coming, her dignity intact, while I felt mine crumbling with each passing minute. At hour 3, the cathedral manager approached apologetically. They had another wedding scheduled at 6. We needed to vacate. I nodded numbly as my bridesmaids gathered my train, as my father settled accounts with vendors, as reality crashed down around me. It was outside on the cathedral steps, my makeup streaked with tears I couldn't hold back any longer, that the photographer from the society pages approached. "Just one quick shot," she said before my father could intervene. The flash blinded me momentarily, capturing forever the image that would go viral by morning. The abandoned bride, surrounded by her bridesmaids like a protection detail. The $5,000 dress, now a costume in a public humiliation. Back at the hotel, as my mother helped me out of my dress, my phone finally buzzed with a message from Malcolm. "I'm sorry, I couldn't go through with it. You deserve someone from your world." 7 words to end 2 years. 7 words to reveal the truth I'd refused to see. I had never really been welcome in his world, and he had never intended to join mine. The knock on the door came 20 minutes later, Malcolm's assistant, looking uncomfortable in her designer suit. "Mr. Reynolds asked me to deliver these papers," she said, avoiding my eyes. Inside the envelope, a cashier's check for $50,000 to cover any wedding expenses, and a non-disclosure agreement. The message was clear. Take the money, keep quiet, disappear. I tore the check into tiny pieces and let them flutter to the hotel carpet. "Tell Mr. Reynolds he can expect my response through legal channels," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. As the hotel door closed behind her, I sank to the floor, still wearing my wedding lingerie, the weight of public humiliation pressing down like a physical force. 300 witnesses to my abandonment. Countless more who would see the photos, read the stories, speculate on what the black woman must have done to drive away the wealthy white man who had apparently come to his senses just in time. In that moment, curled on a hotel floor I couldn't afford, wearing lingerie chosen for a man who had calculated my humiliation, I hit rock bottom. But even then, I didn't know the full extent of Malcolm's betrayal. That would come later, when the real reasons for his disappearance emerged, reasons that had nothing to do with cold feet and everything to do with cold, calculated self-preservation. 2 days after the wedding disaster, while I was still holed up in my apartment ignoring calls and surviving on delivery food, Kendra arrived unannounced with her laptop and a grim expression. "You need to see this," she said, placing the computer in front of me. On screen was a financial news article. Tech mogul Malcolm Reynolds announces merger with European conglomerate, relocates to Zurich. The article was dated the day before our wedding. The deal, worth billions, had apparently been in the works for 6 months, the entire time we'd been planning our marriage. According to the puff piece, Malcolm was praised for his strategic vision in keeping the negotiations under wraps until the deal closed. There was a photo of him signing papers, champagne in hand, surrounded by European executives. The timestamp, 2:15 p.m., the exact moment I should have been saying my vows. "There's more," Kendra said softly, scrolling down to show me another article. This one from a gossip site, showing Malcolm at Zurich International Airport. Beside him, holding his arm and sporting a massive diamond ring, not mine, was Claudia Bergman, heiress to the European conglomerate his company had merged with, the daughter of the man who now controlled the majority stake in Malcolm's company. "They've been engaged for months, according to this," Kendra said, her voice tight with controlled rage. The merger agreement apparently included a marriage clause, old-school European business style. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Malcolm hadn't just abandoned me. He'd been actively planning a future with someone else while promising one to me. Our entire relationship had been a placeholder, a convenient cover while he negotiated the business deal of his lifetime. A deal that apparently required him to marry into the right family. A European banking dynasty with connections his new board of directors would approve of. That night, My phone rang with an unknown international number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Malcolm, his voice artificially casual, as if checking in on a mild inconvenience rather than a life he'd shattered. I never meant for things to go this far, he said. The merger opportunity came up unexpectedly. 6 months ago, I replied, while you were planning our wedding. A pause. The wedding was a mistake. We both know that. We come from different worlds, Jasmine. The cultural gap. Don't you dare, I cut him off. Don't you dare make this about cultural differences. This is about you being a coward, too spineless to tell me the truth. I've arranged a very generous settlement. I don't want your money. I want the last 2 years of my life back. He sighed, the sound of a man dealing with an unreasonable child. You should take it, Jasmine, before things get complicated. What does that mean? It means the NDA my assistant delivered isn't optional. My new position requires discretion. Any public discussions about our relationship would be problematic. The threat was thinly veiled but clear. Take the money and disappear, or face legal consequences. I hung up without another word. The next morning, I received an email from his lawyer outlining exactly what problematic meant. Malcolm had documented every gift he'd given me, every trip he'd paid for, every business introduction he'd facilitated. If I spoke publicly about our relationship, he would pursue claims of fraud, alleging I'd manipulated him for financial gain and business connections. The narrative was already taking shape in certain corners of the internet. The gold-digging black woman who'd tried to trap a successful white man. His legal team had screenshots of edited social media comments, making it appear I'd been after his money all along. The message was clear. Fight this, and I'll not only ruin your reputation, but your business too. A week later, through a mutual connection, I learned the full truth. Malcolm's company had been in trouble for over a year, burning through capital while failing to deliver on promised innovations. The European merger was his Hail Mary pass, saving him from potential bankruptcy. But the Bergman family was old money with old values. They wanted their daughter married to the man taking control of their investment. Malcolm's relationship with me, a black woman from a middle-class background, was a liability in their eyes. When Malcolm introduced me to Claudia at a charity gala 8 months earlier, presenting her as an important business connection, they were already negotiating their future. The night he'd disappeared from our hotel room before the wedding, claiming to need air, he'd been on a video call finalizing details of their engagement announcement, carefully timed to follow the merger news. Most crushing of all was discovering that Malcolm's closest friends had known everything. The same people who'd hugged me at our engagement party had been investing in his new European venture, securing their positions in the restructured company. Their wives, who'd included me in their social circles, had already begun cultivating relationships with Claudia. I hadn't just been betrayed by Malcolm, I'd been a pawn in a game the entire social circle was playing. 3 weeks after the non-wedding, Malcolm's mother called me. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. I want you to know, she said without preamble, that I advised Malcolm against beginning a relationship with you from the start. Our family has certain expectations, certain traditions. Like honesty, integrity, I shot back. Like understanding one's place in the world, she replied coldly. Malcolm needed a wife who could enhance his position, not complicate it. The Bergman girl brings connections, old money, proper breeding. You were an experiment, a phase. I'm sorry you invested so much in what was clearly temporary. Her words stripped away any lingering illusions. Malcolm had never seen a future with me. His family had never intended to welcome me. The entire relationship had been built on lies. His pretense of being the enlightened man who loved beyond racial boundaries, my belief that love could transcend the social hierarchies he actually valued above all else. The truth wasn't just that Malcolm had left me at the altar. The truth was that he had never intended to meet me there at all. I had been a convenient distraction, a socially advantageous accessory, until a better business opportunity presented itself. My blackness wasn't incidental to his betrayal, it was central to it. In the world he truly valued, I had always been considered temporarily interesting, but ultimately unsuitable. That realization, that my race had made me disposable in his eyes, cut deeper than the public humiliation ever could. But it also, strangely, began my healing. Because once I understood the game I'd been playing in, I could finally stop blaming myself for losing. After the truth came to light, I felt like I was drowning in quicksand. Each morning, I'd wake up thinking it was just a nightmare, only to remember it was my actual life. The viral photos, the pitying glances at coffee shops, the clients who suddenly needed to reassess our contract because they didn't want their brands associated with my public humiliation. Malcolm hadn't just taken my heart, he'd put my entire life's work at risk. For 2 weeks, I barely left my apartment. Kendra brought groceries. My parents called hourly. Friends sent flowers until my apartment looked like a funeral home, which felt fitting, since I was mourning the death of not just a relationship, but the future I'd planned and the person I thought I was. Strong, independent, impossible to fool. It was my father who finally broke through the fog. He came to my apartment one morning, opened all the curtains despite my protests, and sat on the edge of my bed. "Jasmine," he said quietly, "that man didn't break you. He revealed you." "Revealed me as what?" I asked bitterly. "A fool. Number as a survivor, as someone who can walk through fire and still stand." He took my hand in his weathered one. "Your mother and I didn't raise you to define yourself through someone else's eyes. Malcolm saw you as an accessory. But you've never been an accessory in your life. You're the main event." Something shifted in me that day. The shame that had been suffocating me began to loosen its grip. I started therapy, not because Malcolm had broken me, but because I needed to understand why I'd allowed myself to be diminished in order to fit into his world, why I'd ignored red flags, silenced my intuition, and abandoned parts of myself to be acceptable to people who never truly accepted me. My therapist, a black woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and zero tolerance for self-pity, helped me see the patterns. "You didn't fail at loving him," she told me during our third session. "He failed at loving you authentically. There's a difference." She helped me recognize how Malcolm had used racial dynamics to control our relationship, positioning himself as my protector in predominantly white spaces while simultaneously requiring me to assimilate into those spaces on their terms. How he'd weaponized my desire for acceptance against me, making me grateful for being tolerated in environments where I should have been celebrated. 3 months after the wedding, I faced another challenge. My business was struggling. Several clients had pulled their contracts, and rumors were circulating in industry circles that I was unstable and difficult to work with. Malcolm's influence, even from Europe, was quietly closing doors. But adversity has always been my best teacher. I pivoted my company towards serving women entrepreneurs, particularly women of color. I developed marketing strategies specifically for businesses that struggled to access mainstream venture capital. I wrote articles about authentic branding that went viral in entrepreneurial circles. 6 months in, something unexpected happened. A major tech company, one of Malcolm's competitors, approached me about heading their diversity in marketing initiative. The female CEO was blunt. "We've seen how you handled yourself with dignity despite that very public mess. We need someone with that kind of resilience and authenticity." The irony wasn't lost on me. Malcolm's attempt to destroy me had actually opened doors to opportunities I might never have considered. Opportunities that aligned more authentically with my values and strengths. Personally, healing came in waves. There were still nights I'd wake up angry, fantasizing about exposing Malcolm to the world. I drafted scathing tell-all pieces I never published, recorded video rants I never posted. My therapist encouraged these exercises, not to act on them, but to release the poison of betrayal from my system. The real breakthrough came when I finally gathered the courage to attend an industry conference where I knew I'd encounter people from Malcolm's social circle. I wore a red dress, bold, unapologetic, and walked in with my head high. The whispers followed me, but this time they didn't wound me. I gave my presentation on authentic brand storytelling to a packed room, and afterward, 3 women approached me privately to share their own stories of betrayal and resilience. That night, I realized Malcolm had taken nothing from me that I couldn't rebuild. He hadn't destroyed my capacity to trust, he'd refined it. I would never again silence my intuition to make someone else comfortable. I would never again shrink myself to fit into spaces not designed to celebrate all of me. A year after the altar abandonment, I received a small package from Switzerland. Inside was a newspaper clipping announcing Malcolm and Claudia's separation amid rumors of corporate restructuring. No note accompanied it, but I recognized Kendra's handwriting on the envelope. I felt nothing but a distant pity for the man who had built his entire identity on appearances and acquisitions, who had sacrificed authentic connection for strategic advantage. That same day, I deleted the draft of the tell-all book I'd been secretly writing. Not because I feared Malcolm's legal threats, but because I no longer needed the world to validate my experience. I no longer needed revenge or vindication. I had something far more powerful, a life rebuilt on my own terms, success achieved through my authentic self, and the wisdom to recognize that sometimes what looks like abandonment is actually liberation in disguise. The woman who stood in that cathedral, in a $5,000 dress, waiting for a man to complete her, no longer exists. In her place stands someone who understands that the most important promise to keep is the one you make to yourself. To never again make yourself smaller for someone else's comfort, to never again mistake luxury for love, and to never again silence the voice inside that knows your worth. That is how I healed. Not by forgetting what happened, but by using it as the foundation for something stronger than what was destroyed. The altar where I was abandoned became the altar where I sacrificed my illusions and reclaimed my power. Today marks 2 years since I stood in that cathedral, surrounded by flowers that cost more than my first car, waiting for a man who was already on a private jet to another life. Sometimes I still catch myself wondering, was any of it real? Did he ever truly see me? But I've learned that these questions are traps. They keep you tethered to a past that doesn't deserve your present. The truth is, what happened to me wasn't unique. The details might be the millionaire fiancé, the international business merger, the viral photos, but the fundamental experience of being valued conditionally, of being seen as temporarily acceptable until something more suitable comes along, is one that many Black women know intimately. We're taught to feel grateful when we're chosen, to work twice as hard to prove we deserve to be in rooms where others belong effortlessly. But here's what I know now that I wish I'd known then. Love should never require you to erase parts of yourself. Success should never demand the sacrifice of your identity. And any relationship that positions your race as something to be overlooked rather than celebrated is already built on a foundation that cannot hold. I didn't share my story to warn you away from interracial relationships. I shared it to warn you away from any relationship where you're expected to be grateful for basic respect, where your intuition is dismissed as paranoia, where your community's concerns are labeled as outdated thinking. These are not just red flags in romantic relationships. They're warning signs in business partnerships, friendships, and professional environments too. The most painful lesson I learned wasn't about Malcolm's betrayal. It was about how easily I betrayed myself. How I ignored the voice in my head because his voice was louder. How I dismissed my friend's concerns because his promises were more seductive. How I accepted subtle diminishment in exchange for proximity to privilege. But here's the beautiful truth that emerged from that painful lesson. When you stop outsourcing your value to someone else's assessment, you become unstoppable. My business is now 3 times the size it was when I was with Malcolm. I've created a foundation that helps minority women entrepreneurs secure funding. Last month, I gave the keynote address at the same conference where I first met Malcolm, except this time, I wasn't in the audience. I was on the stage. This isn't just my story, it's a wake-up call. Look around at your relationships, your friendships, your work environment. Where are you shrinking yourself? Where are you ignoring red flags? Where are you accepting tolerance when you deserve celebration? I'm not telling you to walk away from challenges. I'm asking you to walk away from situations where your inherent value is treated as negotiable, where your identity is treated as an obstacle to overcome rather than the essential beauty of who you are. So, like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe to my channel for more conversations about navigating business, relationships, and self-worth as a Black woman in spaces not designed for us. And please, share your story in the comments. The shame thrives in silence, but healing happens in community. Remember, the person who walks away from you was never worthy of walking beside you. And sometimes, being left at the altar is the universe giving you one last chance to save yourself from a lifetime of being undervalued. I'm living proof that what feels like public humiliation can become the most private reclamation of your power, if you're brave enough to learn the lesson and love yourself more than you loved the fantasy. This isn't the end of my story, it's just the beginning of a truer one. Join me for what comes next.